Hello everyone, it's Chris here. Welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here, and please spread the word, like and subscribe. The usual nonsense people ask you to do. But it's actually important because with MJ books, because of their messages, I would say are really a bit suppressed. There's just a lot of people who just don't want those messages to come out, and since we annoy both sides of the spectrum, the neocons as well as the demo rats. Uh, you know, and then of course they do tend to use whatever influence they have. It's called shadow banning. You'll remember a quote named Ballard Dawn. I explained to you that sometimes they even change the manuscript so that people like Barack Obama can look better. So it's an uphill battle. It's also why I say to you, if you ever get hold of Oath of Evil, the book I speak about constantly because it contains all the truths of what's happening in the world from a biblical viewpoint, get it in writing, because then it can't really be taken away from you again. But anyway, that's besides the point. We want to speak about a book called Code Name Halloween 38. Now, I'm not a follower of Halloween. Let me say to you that's my opinion that Halloween is nothing but a satanic ritual. It's one of those things which were brought into the church from the pagans into the church by the Church of Rome. And then everybody just followed it slavely. And basically, what it comes down to is praying for the dead, for the recently departed. Now, there's nothing wrong with remembering the dead. I mean, if you lost a loved one, and I'm sure all of you did, and myself, then of course there come times when it's perhaps her birthday or the day she died, or whatever your occasion is, and suddenly you just remember fondly and to carry on. But there's one thing you don't do according to the Bible and Scripture, and that is to pray for the dead. Simply because the dead are sleeping. The Bible is very clear on this, and it was also confirmed by Martin Luther and other people, where they stay straightforward. The dead knows nothing. The dead has no life. There's no love. There's no worries. There's nothing. They're forgotten, and they dead, man. It's black. It's all it is. But also, the good news of this is there's no pain, there's no suffering, and they're not in hell. That's the other nonsense which comes from the Church of Rome. And which means that when you close your eyes and you die, for you it will feel like moments later. I mean, you just close your eyes, open your eyes, and there's the resurrection going on. Hopefully, you will be amongst the saints who will be called up with a resurrection, with Jesus' second coming. If not, you're going to wake up and you're going to find Satan in charge, and you're going to find the New Jerusalem after 1,000 years. You're going to find that on earth. And you're going to try and attack that city. And saints and those who are saved and angels will come marching out. And used people will be standing on the side, and fire will come from heaven, and it will devour you. Yeah, you will die a second time. Quick death, unless, of course, you're something like Satan, then it might take a bit longer. But we're not talking about an eternity, not at all. There are some who would, of course, die actually 3 times. You can think of the people who crucified Jesus. They all dead, of course, by now, but they will also be resurrected on the day of the second coming to see Jesus in his glory, and then they will die again because there's no such thing as being left behind. It doesn't sound biblical. And then what will happen is they'll go to heaven, and those who don't will die. Yeah. Your house will be left desolate to you. So it's a very important thing to understand. And it's also completely forbidden by the Bible anyway to pray for the dead. Especially if you think that the dead is going to somehow influence your life or is sitting there in heaven and looking down on you. And this is unbiblical. It's nonsense. Nonsense. So even though the book is called Codename Halloween 38, it's got nothing to do with Halloween as such. It's just a code name. It comes from Melissa, my late wife, second late wife. She was, of course, a Halloween follower, being a Catholic. And also, she is American, and Halloween is what does the Americans always say, apple and pie or something, or apple pie. They have this way of talking with strange English. And 38 years old was what she was when we first met. So that's where the name comes from. But the actual book had nothing to do with Halloween as such. What happens here is that Angelique Dawson, our heroine in the book with mates, she decided she's going to destabilize Zimbabwe. Now, why would she be doing that is an open question. And the story actually starts in the book before, in a codename Mel's Choice. And obviously, Mel's Choice also refers to Melissa. Melissa had more than one name. You can call her Mel as well. I never really did, but I used the name because I was her choice. That's where it comes from. Of course, these things were long before I met Rebecca. I wouldn't do it today, call a book like that. But in those days, I was a widower and still in love with my wife, my late wife. And, you try to honor her, which is not the same thing as praying to her. We have to make a distinction here. It's very important that you understand that. But anyway, so Angelique wants to destabilize him, and in codename Mel's Choice, she starts dropping arms and weapons and things to some opposing groups inside Zimbabwe. Now, why would she do that? It might not be in the interest of the South African government as such, even though there's not a lot of friendship between the two countries, to be honest. We all remember when Mugabe, well, I refer to as a baboon Mugabe, is an insult to a baboon, but anyway, when he started insulting Mr. Mandela, I don't know if you guys remember that, because he got jealous, because he was at that stage the strong man of Africa, or at least he was the famous one. And then came Mandela out of jail, and Mandela was so much better than Mugabe. But it's very interesting because this Robert Mugabe also attended Jesuit schools. Yeah, all roads leads to Rome, When I was still young and a child, I thought they meant with the Roman Empire, perhaps all the roads, physical roads. I didn't realize until much later that who controls things via the Antichrist. But anyway, there's problems in Zimbabwe. Let me tell you that there's problems in Zimbabwe for the West. And out, Angelique and her mates, even though they might be working for the South Africans, they're not always following Pretoria's orders. It's one of the puzzling things about her, which comes out in many of the books. So how official this is, I don't know. I had serious doubts then, and I have serious doubts today. But it comes down to the fact that there are opposing groups in it, and they wanted weapons. And Angelique decided to start smuggling these weapons to them. And how she did it is described in Codename Phantom, which is a book before Mel's Choice. Remember I said to you, you can read every book by its own, and you should. But they do follow on each other. But every book deals with a certain topic, and then this book deals with psyops. That's what we're going to talk about just now. But just to make a long story short, in Phantom, she found a way of getting weapons towards the border of Zimbabwe, and then in Mel's Choice, you have to actually fly in and drop it, and she uses a C-47, a Dakota, and she almost gets shot down. In fact, she did get shot down. I hesitate in saying this because, according to her, she can't be shot down, but the aircraft was damaged enough for her to make an emergency landing. There was a lot of betrayal going on the site. There's also something happening, but we're not talking about Mel's Choice now. But from that, from that comes this book, Halloween 38, where she decides she's going to take revenge. And what she's going to do is she's going to destabilize relations between China, communist China, and Zimbabwe. Now, there's a lot of Chinese military actually in Zimbabwe. You see quite often, if you're there, you see the super freelance flying around, which they built illegally, totally legally under license. They built them the same as the Soviet Union were building the DC-3, which is exactly the same copy, totally legally on the license during the 1950s. In fact, we encountered one of them with Codename Angelique, where we discussed the use of gliders in counterterrorism operations, which is probably the book which I think is one of the most interesting of a J.M. James series, if you like that type of subject, of course. But she got hold of one of these super freelance. In fact, she stole one. Confiscate is perhaps a better word. And she's flying it, and she's flying these missions in and out. And now she decided she's going to ambush them. In other words, what she wants to do is she wants to make it appear like the Rhodesians are coming back. So total psyops. And then because he's using a Chinese aircraft, looking like a Chinese aircraft, flying around there, painted the same way, everything. She even makes Lucy dye her hair, which is normally more blonde and not blonde, but it's not black. She makes her dye her hair black so she can look a bit Chinese from a distance. And she also involves some special forces people to assist her with the ambush. And then they get to the ambush site by way of, I believe they did a AO jump, so they glided in. And they also brought in mortars, which were used by steerable parachutes, cargo drops. So we also describe that, how to do a cargo drop like that, where you drop a cargo and it has this computerized parachutes. So it opens, it's steerable like a square rig. And you can drop these things exactly where you want them to drop, unless something goes wrong with your parachute, of course. But normally it works, and then you can drop up to, I think, 6,000 pounds, which is a total load of a C-47 anyway, depending on height and conditions. So it's very interesting. It's technical, it's technical, but also in the book they start talking about psyops, because this is all it is. It's a psyop which they are conducting. And it's a subject which fascinated me for a long time, because there are two schools of thought. One school of thought says it's just bullshit, it's rubbish. You spent a lot of money and effort, you don't really get anything back for it. And others, from the famous generals, Eisenhower was one. So was Montgomery. They actually do believe in psyops. They thought it can make a difference, and if you can get the enemy to surrender, you don't have to shoot them. So one of the funniest ones which ever happened in the world, as far as I know, is during the Second World War. They started dropping condoms, FLs, I suppose, French letters, what do you call it? You know what I mean. And they started dropping these things on Japanese positions, but these things were made for elephants, man, or for horses. They were like as big as my forearm, this is like something else. And and of course the idea was to show the Japanese men, the soldiers, they're not that well endowed, while the American guys, of course, are physically bigger than them and therefore more able to perform better, I suppose. But you understand what I mean. That's one of the tricks they played. They tried it in Vietnam as well. It didn't work because the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong and the Viet Minh before them, and then the North Vietnamese army, the NVA, they actually knew about the 6 uses of condom in war, besides the obvious one. There are actually a lot of things you can do with a condom, which is very helpful in war. I mean, you can put it over your rifle barrel, keep the dust out. That happened quite a bit with the machine guns. I think in 101 Battalion I've heard about Khufu doing it as well. Definitely SAP coined it. But you couldn't do that if a chaplain was around or you had a bit of a strange commander. They would like, no, guys, no, you can't do that. So, I remember I've had two, I don't want to use the word stupid, two innocent questions in my life. The first one was when training at counterinsurgency, and the one guy stood up and he asked the sergeant, and he was actually serious. He asked the sergeant, where do you refill the gas for the R1 rifle to reload itself? Of course, the gas comes from the patron, the bullet, That's where it comes from. There's no real cylinder or something which you screw on and then there's gas. But he had completely no understanding of that, which I blame his instructors in the police college, because he was a good policeman. He just didn't know that. And the sergeant started looking at him for about at least a minute. I could see the sergeant was thinking, is this guy taking me on? Is he trying to, or is he serious? But the guy really looked serious, and so I explained. And the other one, which was a bit silly, is one asked me once, but do we need to take the condoms off before we start shooting? No, just shoot. Bullet will go through it, no problem. The only problem you might have is, of course, the rubber might melt against the barrel. You know how it is. If you shoot quite a few bullets, that barrel gets damn warm. So anyway, we'll talk about the different PSYOPs here. The first thing which actually came out in the books, which was interesting to me, is the use of airborne radar. Because just in the previous video, I don't know if it's previous to this one, but the one I made yesterday, we were speaking about Codename Dawn, and we were speaking on how you can use airborne radar to track an enemy or hostile target helicopter. In that case, it was a Mi-8, and just, direct your fighter aircraft to go and shoot it down, which is not as easy as it sounds. So airborne radar, actually, I don't know how many of you were actually thinking on where did it come from? Whose idea was that first? And of course, if you're American, you will say, of course, it was you. I mean, where's the Grand Canyon? Where's the biggest egg in the world? Where's the biggest whatever? They're actually lovely people, the Americans, in certain ways. And in other ways they're not. But anyway, it wasn't them, by the way. It was the Brits. The British actually developed airborne radar during World War II, and they did that to find submarines. Because you will remember that arch liar Winston Churchill, the war criminal, the one who was drunk at cabinet meetings, and then during his drunken state he wanted to drop poison gas on Tokyo. That guy, the one who after the Second World War, when they were fighting the Red Army, used a lot of poison gas. Him, The funny thing is about Churchill, where he was actually correct, like a place like Gallipoli, where more French soldiers died than the Anzacs combined. Much more. It's to France, it's not even, I don't even remember Gallipoli, it's unimportant to it. He was actually correct, and yet he had to resign because it failed. And it failed because the admirals of the Royal Navy were too cowardly to force the passage. They didn't want to take losses. Even though he said to them in writing, it doesn't matter if you lose a few ships, especially the ships they were using. Most of them were actually pre-dreadnought, so they were already old-fashioned, but they could still shoot. But anyway, that's just a side point. You will remember that Churchill said the one thing which he feared during the war was actually the convoys being intercepted. And they were intercepted. I mean, they were wolf packs. By the end of the war, they had 500 submarines out. But it was over by that time, and it was largely over because of radar. The technical superiority went to the airborne radar, could find the submarines, they couldn't stay on the surface, and of course the convoy principle. But having said that, every convoy was also not a fight to the death. I mean, most of them just got through. But having said that, the deaths of merchant marine sailors are actually extremely high. It's as high as the ones of the U-boats, which is amazingly high, as well as the bomber command. They also lost a lot of people. It's amazing. Anyway, so Survivor ones were at Coastal Command, where at the Vickers, Wellington bombers, and they put in a rotating antenna. And it worked well enough, and that's how they defeated the U-boat threat. And then they started at the Bay of Biscay. If I say that word correctly, it's very close to France. It's not far from the UK, but that's where they tested it out. And so that became a thing of war, and then the Americans, of course, got involved immediately by 1944, February 1944. Now, this is interesting because around about 1940, when they thought that Britain would fall, they were convinced that the Germans would come across the channel, the English Channel, which is now called what? The American Channel? No, that is the Gulf of Mexico. But I know they wanted to change it to something. I mean, that's ridiculous. Anyway, at that stage, the UK gave all its technical knowledge and scientific knowledge to the US. In other words, what they did is they took all their papers and all their plans and all their patents, everything, and they moved it to the US and basically gave the heart and soul of the UK, of the British Empire, for the US to abuse, which they thoroughly did. Part of it was the nuclear program, which immensely helped the Manhattan Project. I think they called it tube alloys from that. And then, of course, after the war, 1945, we all know about the German scientists being recruited by the US and a little bit of the UK. And they were then taken over von Braun, the rocket scientists, all of them, because actually Nazi Germany scientists who went to the US to help with the development of rockets, which became missiles and then the moon missions. Paperclip, that's what they call it, Operation Paperclip. But you know what you don't know, because that's very well known. You know what you don't know is that when Germany fell, between the Soviet Union and allies, and thereby I mean the Americans, the second beast of the Bible, they completely grabbed the entire patent office of Germany. So they grabbed everything. And that is where they came up with tapes. Remember in the old days, before we had CDs and cell phones and things, every car had like first a 8-deck tape. That's before my time. But in my time, you had like a radio with a tape deck. There's a little thing like this. So the young people won't know what I'm talking about. That is stolen Nazi technology. That's where that comes from. But anyway, so in 1944, in February, the US Navy put airborne radar in a TBM Avenger torpedo bomber, and that was known as Project Cadillac. And it worked. It could detect low-flying formations up to 100 miles away, and that really helped. Which reminds me, there's something else which happened. Very, very interesting, actually. Just when the war started, the Second World War, I think it might even be 1939, a mysterious package arrived, I think in Sweden or somewhere. And inside it was a device which the Brits couldn't figure out. They couldn't understand what it is until they realized this is actually a shell which with approximately fuse. Which means, of course, if it comes in close range to the aircraft they're shooting it will explode. And they immediately implemented this. Very fascinating, the technical battles and things. But anyway, that's where airborne radar started. It's described in this book. Very fascinating to me. And then there's another thing which came out here, which is called Starstreak. Now, why it's interesting is South Africa, the South African Army actually have Star Streak. They got it from, I think, Tails, whatever, the manufacturer. And before that, it was manufactured by Shorts of Belfast. And here they have like a semi-guided, almost like a shell, which they shoot at a missile or incoming aircraft or whatever. If it hits, it's like a 40 millimeter hitting that thing, so it's quite destructive. But you have to hit it. It's a problem. There's no real guidance on it. It's just like a fancy bullet. They say it can be used against armor, but it definitely will not work against a tank. It will only work against the light armor. It might work. Now, why I mention this is it goes back to the 2012 Olympic Games, which was held in London. Now, guys, if you ever want to see an occultic, satanic type of game, even worse than what happened at France, and I discussed that also in the latest book, Codename Snake 606, and how these Satanists actually mock the Christianity is amazing. And it started with the very first Olympic Games in the modern era, because Olympic Games are always satanic. But it became worse and worse and worse as they put their occult signals and things inside it. And one of the very, very worst is the 2012 London Olympics. If you go and search London Olympic Games 2012 and Professor Dr. Walter Weiff, he made the entire episode on that, and he shows you how all the devil's symbols and the occult and satanic things are all inside there. It is amazing. You look at this and you see every people are just clapping hands. Oh, it's so cute. You've got no idea you were clapping hands for Satan himself. It is amazing. But Group 4 Security Corps was supposed to do the security there, and they couldn't do it. They took the money, they took the contracts, everything. They couldn't do it, and then of course the British Army were to come and assist them, and so they did. It was a huge scandal, completely forgotten now. And with like all the Olympic Games anywhere, you know, they always promise you there's going to be all these investments and it's going to increase. Please, nothing happened ever. Nothing. It's bullshit. It's nonsense. If you go back to any place where the Olympic Games have been held, you find nothing of interest there. All is dilapidated. It's gone. It was for that moment in the sun to honor the sun god. That's all it was. That's all where the money goes. It's bullshit. It's a white elephant. It's absolutely nonsense. And if you lived in Switzerland like I did, you will go to, you can go down to the Lake Geneva, which is fairly ugly as far as I'm concerned. But some people will say it's pretty. I mean, it is sometimes, but not for me. But if you stand there and you look across, you will see France, which is nice to see. Evian, it's just across. Evian also played a major role in the when and where books about the Jewish army, if you want to know more, because that's where they had, I think in 1938, they had a meeting where they had an entire bunch of countries and people, even, well, the Jews were not invited, but they were there. And that's where they were discussing the European Jewish issue. And that's basically where the concentration camps started. Didn't come into being until 1941. They're killing now. But that was virtually the last chance for them to get out. And they couldn't. But you can read it in When Does It End, if you're interested. But anyway, if you stand and you now look towards Swineland, you're going to see the Olympic headquarters. It's grotesque. It is huge. It's big. They pay fantastically well. They are, and you can see they just love themselves. No, it's pathetic. It's pathetic. Why anybody will support the Olympic Games, I don't know. But whatever. It's for you to do what you do. I don't care. And then Star Streak, by the way, was also deployed to Olympic Games because they expected, I don't know, apparently something to happen. And the Brits went up into arms, as soon as the British Army started deploying these air defense systems of them. They were like, no, we don't want you here in our front yard, It's just amazing, there's no such thing as loyalty towards your country left. Patriotism, of course, is a bad thing. It's a conservative thing, you know. It's amazing, You should be loyal to your country. You should support your armed forces, and you should actually be patriotic. Not to the sense of going to kill other people just because you don't like them, but you know what I mean. Anyway, the Star Streak was then given to Ukraine, and it failed miserably. Couldn't get close to the Russians, simply because the Russians would launch from out of range. And so the Russians anyway have complete air superiority there. So it didn't work. In later years, it became known as Force Shield. The reason why I speak about this is it's because it features in the book as well. And even there, I was saying it won't work. It might work in Africa, but it depends on who you're up against. Anyway, so we in the book also we start talking about prior psyops. One which they mentioned was Quick Speak, which was in the Vietnam War, 1966. Now, the US, you have to give them credit. When they do something, it is an immensely powerful and rich country. And therefore, they can do it at a scale which most people cannot even imagine. I mean, it's just amazing. Doesn't make them good or successful, but man, they do things in style. So they had about 20 aircraft. In 1966 was already, they were using 4 Dakotas and 16 U-10s. Now, I don't know if you know what is a U-10. The U-10 is one of these aircraft which can land basically in almost no distance whatsoever. You can put that thing down almost on a tennis court, and it will take off in almost a tennis court. It's ridiculous. If I can find a picture, I'll put it here for you. They were using that, but they had losses because before that, in 1961 already, they were trying these PSYOPs flights. By that time, the Vietnam War wasn't going on. They were there as advisors. So they took over from the French, who you know has lost the war at Dien Bien Phu. And if I'm ever in Vietnam, that's where I want to go to and film there for Legacy Conversations. So I also want to go and do the at Bridge of the River Kwai, which is in Thailand. That I might do before the year is over. We'll see. Depends on when Rebecca is coming back and what happens further with the hotel. But it's fascinating how they always try to cover themselves. Now remember, 1961, I believe, is when John F. Kennedy was involved. And again, if we go back to Codename Dawn, you will remember that he's the guy who wanted to send a squadron of Phantom IIs, McDonnell Douglas Phantom, the latest fighter aircraft, to hunt down the Katanga Republic's 4 Majester Fuga or something, trainer jets, which really was no threat to them. But anyway, he wanted to do that, but then he had this other great idea of Vietnam. Now Kennedy, it's interesting about Vietnam is because the president of Vietnam was also what do I hear? Catholic? Yes. Most of the dictators in the world actually are. How's that possible, man? I don't know. If you read the books, you will find out. I'll actually put a list for you here, if I remember, that virtually every single great dictator in the world is all Catholics. How's that possible? I don't understand it unless there's a Jesuit influence on them. But anyway, the Vietnam War actually started there were a lot of military officers who actually said they shouldn't get involved because they're going to lose it. It's not the type of war which the US Army wants to fight. And it would unbalance them. They would have to, look at counterinsurgency instead of, the normal role of conventional warfare in Europe and other places. And so they didn't want to do it. But then came a Catholic influence on it, and America got involved. It is explained in some of the books. It is very fascinating how that came into being. It was revealed in a book written by some US officer, which, of course, they then immediately attacked as much as they could. But by 1961, they were using their C-47s and they were dropping rice sacks and things. But the effect was puzzling because some of the villagers just ignored it. They wouldn't even pick the rice up. And others were more excited about it. And that was in the same village. That was the problem. If it was like, say, in one village and the other village not, then you can think, all right, there's Viet Cong or around there, and perhaps they don't want to do it, or they're already under the influence of a Viet Cong. That would be, you can explain that. But when it happens in the same village, it cannot be explained. But by February 1962, one of the quick speak C-47s were actually shot down. And so immediately the White House said, right, we're not going to fly these missions anymore. The Americans, that is, the South Vietnamese Air Force must do it. So what changed is they just changed the ribbons and the things on the insignia on the aircraft. And the US Air Force pilots were still there, flying as co-pilots for a while. A very long while, actually. And that's then what happened. I'm trying to explain this to you because it's part of PSYOPs, but it's also deniable. We're trying to get away from that. So by 1967, they had now 50 aircraft flying PSYOPs for them at about 1,000 to 3,000 feet. And they also have this POF, a Magic Dragon. So they would, come with their loudspeakers and then they make all these noises or they would talk to them in Vietnamese or whatever. And after the war, it came out that there were strict orders never to shoot at these aircraft simply because they knew that the gunship would then come in afterwards and start shooting them. Now, the Americans never saw that. The Americans were like, this was the greatest fun in the world. They were their miniguns. When they start raining tracers down, it's a very impressive sight. I have to ask, what did you actually shoot? Probably nothing. Or if you did shoot anything, then you shot innocents. It's just not the way to do it. It just doesn't work. But anyway, so they did that, and then they would be like, all manly, yeah, we want you not to do that. You know what? It's good for Hollywood crap. I don't look at Hollywood crap. I want results. Always results, results, and results. End of story. If I pay 10 rand for something, I want 10 rand worth of value. If I can get 15, I'm even better. Don't want 20 because I don't want you to feel abused. You know what I mean? But it's the same, I suppose, with my books. If you paid whatever you paid for the books, I do want you to feel that you actually got something back, which gave you value and pleasure or delight or whatever. So yeah. And then came the helicopter, and now the helicopters are actually better at this because they fly slower. And therefore, you can hear better the sound coming from the air. And they use it in a lot of places, not only Vietnam afterwards, in Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia. They tried it in Iraq. They tried it in Afghanistan as well. And they do say that it actually worked. In the second Iraqi war, where Saddam Hussein was deposed, the one for weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist. It still doesn't exist, never existed. No. So why was this Iraqi war being fought? What happened there? It's interesting. There's people who say this was done because of Israel. They wanted to overthrow Iraq, so it's no threat to Israel. And then they wanted to carry on to overthrow Iran. That was the grand plan. It's confirmed by a US general, I think Clark, or West, something like that. I'm not sure about it. West Clark or something, it's very well known. And yeah, they had that plan. Yeah, they wanted to attack all these Middle Eastern countries, make Israel safe forever. And it didn't work. Israel is now in more danger than ever before. The Israelis deny this, of course. They say it's nonsense. This was a fight between America and Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction, which Israeli intelligence actually convinced the US intelligence, and it didn't take much to do, that the weapons are actually there. You know, it's like this Netanyahu, every 5 minutes he's standing there for the last 25 years. Iran is 1 week away from making a nuclear bomb. Yeah, in 5 years goes past, there's no bomb. Iran is 1 week away. Another 5 years go past. What about Israel's nuclear weapons? Tell me about that. It's not confirmed. It's not denied. And the US, for even to have any business deals with Israel, the Jewish state, is actually against their own laws. Because they're not allowed by their own laws to do that with a nuclear armed state who hasn't declared it, who is not part of the nuclear treaties. And yet it's an open secret. Everybody knows about it. We know what Golda Meir said during Yom Kippur, when she gave that order open to Moshe Dayan, who's a man I really admire. Golda Meir too, I really admire Golda Meir. When she gave that orders to arm the nuclear weapons, that's how deep Israel was in trouble. That's how deep it was. And I guarantee you it will happen again. If for some reason Israel is being overrun by Arab forces, they will nuke them. Because they have no choice. They have no choice. If they fall, then I don't think there'll be any Jew left alive in Israel. It will be a slaughter you've not seen before. And it's actually one of my fears, because I'm not against Israel at all. If you read my books, you will find a lot of combined operations, and very respectful too. I will be upfront and tell you I don't think much of Mossad in Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, because they don't fit in and they don't know what they're doing. At the very same time, I'll say to you, I highly respect them for what is happening for what they do in the Middle East, and especially in the US, where they are probably running neck to neck with China, communist China, in spying on the US. Why they feel the need to do that, I don't know. My personal feeling is with Israel and the US is that the US is using Israel as a dog, as an attack dog, to destabilize that region. The more they destabilize it, the more Christians get killed. Read Oath of Evil. I go into some detail on what I think is happening there. But of course, you have to be very careful what you say, because if you say that the US is controlled by Israel, or you say that Congress is actually occupied territory, immediately you are banned. And people think you're anti-Semitic and things like that. Well, you have to be honest and say that the Jewish lobby does have influence on the US, which is amazing. But I don't think it's their influence so much. I think they are actually being played. And I don't believe in disinvestment in Israel either. But at the same time, I'll tell you that it's your damn right to decide where you want to invest your money. If you want to invest your money in Israeli firm, then do so. And if you don't want to, then don't do so. But it's not for the US government to come and tell me where I should invest my money. It's not the same as investing. Say you can't invest and send money to Al-Qaeda or something. That you can understand completely. No problem. But that's a lot different, you know. So let's talk about leaflets as well, because that's one of the things which Angelica is dropping besides the weapons, which they are dropping in Zimbabwe. And they all make it look like it's the Rhodesians coming back. So they would speak in this terrible British accent of chat. And that one part of the book, and it's actually a very good part, they ambush these people. They know that one of their drop zones is compromised, and so they actually go to the drop zone, and then they ambush them. And while they're doing this, they're playing the Saints. They're marching, which is a song of the RLI. Very nice song indeed, because they were known as the Saints. And so they would tell them, we're back, you know, that type of thing, and then they open up. It is very fascinating, because there's also one team or special forces, they deliberately want to be spotted. So this team actually stays behind to be chased, because they're going to lead them, and that goes into the next book, Codename Annika, they're going to lead them into an ambush, where the G6 and the Valkyrie systems are actually used in cloak and dagger stuff. Can you believe it? But anyway, back to South Vietnam, they dropped 508 million of leaflets to get these guys to surrender, and that was only in the first few months of 1966. And by 1967, the Tet Offensive started. Now, with Tet Offensive, during that time, they dropped 103 million leaflets, and they broadcasted non-stop for 380 hours offline time. That is 15.8 days, or 24 hours a day. So that shows you how big they were. I mean, they could afford to do this, but it also shows you that nothing came of their 500 million leaflets a year before Tet Offensive. It had no real effect, because the Tet Offensive was one, at Hue, I think, where they actually took the city over. They attacked the US embassy. That is where the American public actually woke up to the fact that they lost the Vietnam War. And that's where they started thinking of, they have to get out. And they would have gotten out immediately if it wasn't for Nixon. Yeah, President Nixon. He was then running for president, I think against Barry Goldwater or somebody, because Lyndon B. Johnson, said he won't run again. Johnson, of course, is the one who took over from Kennedy when Kennedy was killed. Now, this Nixon fellow, of course, became very famous for Watergate in later years. But he actually did something much worse, which most Americans don't know. Is he sabotaged the peace deals between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, which were being held in Paris peace deals, because he said to the North Vietnamese that he actually will give him a better deal. And so they held back. They didn't sign anything. And another, I think, 55,000 Americans died because of that. Yeah? Strange how those things are never mentioned, is it? But the fact of the matter is, if you think of the amount of leaflets drops and the efforts, and then came Tet Offensive, it couldn't have worked that well. But at the same time, 34,000 of the North Vietnamese, or call them Viet Cong, did surrender. That is true. So here comes the argument now. You had dropped about 611 million leaflets if you combine the two batches now, and you get 34,000 people surrendering out of 611 million. Look, it's a good thing if those 34,000 surrendered. I mean, they might have shot your aunt or your uncle or something, so that's a good thing. How well they were treated after they were surrendered, I don't know. There's lots of rumors about that too. We all know about the Kit Carson scouts, but I'm not sure that you can call that a success. I don't know. It's for you to decide. I'm just mentioning it here. But I think it can work. PsyOps definitely can work, and if you can save the life of your own people, then you should do it. It's just my opinion, but I don't think that you should rely on it just like that, or take it too much to heart. It is just another thing you can use, and I think that's a lesson which I suppose come out from Codename Halloween. I also mentioned a book there written by a Brit, but he was living in South Africa for a long time. Chapman, Lieutenant Colonel Spencer Chapman. It's one of the books which I rated the most highly in my library. It is called The Jungle is Neutral. If you can ever get hold of that book, just get hold of it, because he wrote it in the Second World War. He was trapped behind enemy lines, I think here in the East, Malaysia, one of those places. And the Japanese overran them, and then they stayed behind and they formed terror groups. which the Japanese would call terrorists. I would call them freedom fighters, whatever. And he wrote a book called The Jungle is Neutral. And basically that became the Bible of the SAS, of the Special Air Service, when they got back to the Malay problems they had, and they were resurrected from wartime, and they had to start doing counterinsurgency with a very great influence from the Rhodesians, who were also there. That is where that book became almost the Bible. Because what that book said is, the jungle is neutral. In other words, if you struggle to find water and food and have diseases and all sorts of things, so does your enemy. It's neutral. It's neutral ground in that aspect. So it's for you to adapt. You have to adapt. The quicker you can adapt to where you're operating, the better. So that is why it's a very bad thing which you've seen in Iraq, especially when you see Americans driving around in their closed armored vehicles with the air cons on. It's very nice. It's cool inside. The problem is you don't see anything outside. You don't mix with the people, and you can't acclimatize. Is that the word? You can't get used to the heat. And therefore, when you do get out and you're overloaded and you're fat as well, not as fit as you damn well should be, then of course you're going to suffer. You're going to struggle. And so that shows that they were not following the principle of a jungle is neutral. In fact, they don't even know about it. In Malaysia, during that crisis, actually, they did use same type of psyops again, leaflets and spreading the word and getting people to surrender. They got 1,800 people to surrender by May of 1951. But is it really, once again, a success? I mean, I think it was actually, because the Brits actually won in Kenya, their counterinsurgency, and they won in Malaysia, in the sense that a stable government then took over, which were afterwards very pro-Western. Because normally when you lose these things, you get pro-communist. In those Cold War years, you would get a pro-communist government, right? So if you look at it then from that way, from that viewpoint, then it meant that South Africa also succeeded in Namibia, because Namibia today is a stable, so I'm told anyway, a stable pro-Western type of government, even though we're very close to the Chinese. Walvis Bay, Reed, Coatner and Ghost. You'll find out that Walvis Bay, with its new port and its container harbor, built by the Chinese, can very easily become a Chinese naval base. That's why they built it. But also just back in Zimbabwe, the other reason why it comes out in this book, and especially the previous book, Mel's Choice, is that the Chinese have a huge military base there called, in a place called Maringwe. Now, it's very fascinating because there's a South African angle. The former South African Air Force Alouettes, at some stage, the ANC government wanted to donate them towards the Zimbabwean Air Force. And there was a court case which went all the way, I think, to the appeal court in Bloemfontein to stop him from doing it, because it would be against the UN embargoes and things. There were reasons why they didn't want to do it, because they said Zimbabwe Air Force will just take these Alouettes and make them military again, and then use them against the population. Now, that is exactly what was happening in the early 2000s, 2005-06, in Zimbabwe, in Maringwe, which is close to Mozambique, on that site where special forces were operating in, as D Squadron of the Rhodesian Special Air Service. If you listen to SVF Fourie and those people, they talk about operating there. It is round about that area. But of course, where South African Special Forces were operating during the Rhodesian War inside Mozambique, I'm talking right inside the old Rhodesia, right inside Zimbabwe. And there they have a massive air base. They have got a big base there. They say they can host about 50,000 troops, which is 2 divisions. And it's massive and it's big. And they're also building a railway line, I'm told, between Maputo, Lorenzo Marques, all the way to this place to reinforce it. Now, it puzzled me greatly. Why would the Chinese do that? Because, America, the second beast, have about, 840 to 900 bases across the world. Why? Because they have to. If they follow the biblical principle of having to enforce the will of the first beast, that is Rome, then they need all these bases across the world to enforce it. How else? Well, why else are they doing it? Why are they the world's policemen? You have to bring these things to a higher picture to understand what's happening. And unless you do that, you will never understand it because it makes no sense. From a military viewpoint, anyway, it makes no sense to have 840 bases because you know what? They can be overrun quite quickly and quite easily. I guarantee you, should there a war break out between Iran and the US, they will flatten those US bases right around in the Middle East. They're already targeted. If something happens between the US and China, same story. They will flatten those bases. They are paper tigers. There's nothing to it. Of course, you then have to think what the US will do afterwards, because they will take these massive losses. Then they will become all patriotic again. That's when they're at their most dangerous, actually. And then they will regroup and then they will come back with one hell of a force. But if you're a place like China, you will not really be bothered with that. You'll take them. If you're a lesser nation, you might have a problem. Now, besides this base of theirs in Maringwe, they also have huge spy satellites and things. I think close to Salisbury or Harare. I'm not sure which one of the two. I might be wrong with the names. It doesn't matter. It is very in the middle of Zimbabwe. Now, I could never understand that because as a BRICS nation, it makes more sense that they would do these things right inside South Africa. But I think it's too obvious. It's too obvious if they do that. And I don't think that the South African public, especially the white people, will not be happy about that. Because they still see China, of course, as the enemy. Because they still think in a NATO Western way. Like I keep on telling you, that's not the way the government is actually thinking about it. They're thinking BRICS. But my theory is, and it comes out in Gordon Mell's choice, is that should something happen and a world war break out, South Africa is going to be very important, like always, because of the Cape of Good Hope. Also that they have harbors, even though you say to me they won't work, but the Chinese can get them to work quite quickly, where they can actually dock ships, warships even, and repair them. Right? These things are very important. It's the only harbors who can actually do it from Egypt. There's no other harbors in Africa who can do it. So that makes South Africa very important because it's going to cut that trade route. So I said to you before, if you look at where the BRICS nations are, you will see that they tend to be in places where they can cut trade routes. And that's why. That's why the US does not even realize that it's completely surrounded already. Doesn't know it. It's like a sniper have you in its sights. It's got the dot, that laser dot right on your forehead. He just needs to pull the trigger. You don't know it. I don't know it. They're too arrogant. They just don't get it. But it's true nonetheless. And of course, if that happens, South Africa will have to be reinforced very quickly because there's no real way that the South African military can take on something like the US. I mean, that's ridiculous. And there's every chance in the book, of course, that the US will have to win. If I say US, I mean NATO. Will have to then retake the Cape, at least, and destroy Durban Harbour as well. But they will struggle to do that if there's a massive Chinese reinforcement coming south. That can happen. That I actually expect to happen. Are there plans drawn for that? I'm not aware of any. I speak to a lot of very senior military officers in in legacy conversations and where we speak off the record, they just grin at you and they don't say a word further. I don't think it's like that, but I think it can happen, and I think that's one of the major reasons why they're there. There is no other logical reason why they would station people there. They don't have 30,000 people there. Don't misunderstand me, but it's built for about 30,000, which means they can put 50,000 in there. And now you're talking a lot of people, which has to be, of course, then supported logistically and so forth, and that's where the weak point lies. But South Africa can actually support them too. There's things happening in the background, which comes out in these books, which are very, very fascinating. Well, anyway, that is Codename Halloween 38. It's well worth for you to read it. It's very interesting how Angelique sets this up, how she plans this thing, how she gets everything in place, and then she launches this strike where she actually gets him to shoot at her, and then she opens up at the very same way as Puff the Magic Dragon, and then she's shooting back and she's causing serious hurt, and at the same time, Special Forces guys was around there and has already been lying waiting where they open up with their mortars as well. I don't need to tell you guys what happens when these big 80mm and 120mm mortars start shooting. Man, that is something else. And even there, we're using very special type of mortar shells, which is guided. So we speak about that in this book as well. Fascinating. It's fascinating the things which comes out in the books. I mean, that's why I thoroughly enjoyed writing them. It's not a big deal. The difficult part for me when I write the books actually is when I've written them, and now I have to summarize them into a short description. That's very hard for me. I think those guys who can write poetry, like my friend Elsa, the sniper, she's a good poet herself. They can write these short things. I can't. I explain too much actually. That's also why these videos are so long. But forgive me. That's the way I am. And anyway, I've got to go now because the monsoon is still going on here in Thailand. And it means we're very busy with a lot of things. I have to put up 11 mosquito nets in 11 different rooms so that mosquitoes can't get you during the night. That's very important. Codename Halloween 38 is available on Amazon, hardcover, softcover, as well as audio and Kindle. It's not a short book. It's almost 500 pages, about 483. I mentioned these things very briefly, but if I say to you that this happened in Vietnam, you can be assured it's a much more detailed how we discuss these things and how we talk about PsyOps during the ages. Very, very fascinating if you're interested in the subject. And what is also fascinating is, of course, that PsyOps is not run by normal military officers, and not run by the infantry, it's run by intelligence. And in this case, of course, by the civilian spies, I can put it like that. But they use conventional means and ways of doing it because they're all conventionally trained as well. Remember, Angelique herself passed the commando course of a French Navy, which makes her the same as a Navy SEAL. So she knows everything about it. And there's also a reason why the French, during the Eggbreaker War, which we spoke about, actually promotes her to a Major General because he passed the staff courses. She's capable of acting as a Major General, and she does. She has those abilities. She understands war. And then you combine it, of course, with a natural havoc, which she causes wherever she goes. Then, yeah, you have a dangerous combination. Anyway, hope you enjoy the book. God bless. Until we see again.